So smooth muscle is where we left off. So smooth muscle is found in walls of viscera and the blood vessels. Smooth muscle cell traits, short fusiform cells, so they're wide in the middle, tapered at each end. One centrally located nucleus, no striations. Thin filaments attached to dense bodies. Sarcoplasmic reticulum and sparse T-tubules are absent. Contain calmodulin, which usually acts with calcium, and not troponin. So activity stimulates entry of calcium from outside of the cell, and then calcium binds to calmodulin, and calmodulin activates a kinase that activates myosin to pull actin. So another term you might see for calcium calmodulin is CAM. So a CAM kinase is a cell adhesion molecule that is calcium linked that binds to a kinase. And that kinase, anything that's a kinase, is going to phosphorylate something. So calmodulin activates kinase, which phosphorylates myosin to pull actin. So it generates slow, efficient, fatigue-resistant contractions. So here's the structure. So you see they have the dense body, intermediate filament, thick filament, thin filament. Remember, so these thin filaments are the ones that move, the thick ones don't move. Adjacent cells physically coupled to dense plaques and nucleus and cell body. So this is the relaxed smooth muscle, and this is contracted. So you see how it's dense, but it still keeps the distance of the thick membrane, the thick microfilament. The thin filaments are squeezing in. So development we're not going to go too much into, but we'll talk a little bit about this. So tongue muscles are formed from occipital myotomes. So all of these here, I'll talk about it later, sorry. Neck muscles from cervical myotomes. So myotomes are divisions of muscle that they all do the same specific thing. So each one of these sets of muscles in between all have the same function. So here's the intercostal muscles from thoracic myotomes, abdominal muscles from thoracic lumbar and thumbar myotomes, and the pelvic floor to form for sacral myotome. So this is the fetus. So here's the lower limb starting. So these will be the legs. And then back here, the arm starts. So this will be the arm. So these are the dorsal muscle mass extensors. And see, this is what they will turn out to be. And then the same with the leg. Just know very basic about this. So muscle tissue types. So I use this in presentations in every class because it's very nice. So these are the difference between skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Know this chart. Know this chart. Know this chart. Know this chart. So this we don't have to know in as much detail because these are the tissue types. And we've already done tissue, so we don't want to revisit them all over again. But now there's the endomysium, the epimysium, right? It's the outer layer. The muscle fiber, the fascicle, so the groups of muscle fibers, and the perimysium. So the epimysium is the layer, right? The outside layer of skin. And this is when women have babies, they have an episiotomy. This is what they're cutting, is that layer of the muscle, layer of the muscle by the birth canal. So just know what these are. I'm not expecting you to know too much about them, but I would know the calcium source. That was the last slide. Sorry for the abrupt ending, but now we're on chapter 11. So muscles of the head and neck, vertebral column, respiration, abdominal wall, and muscles of the pelvic floor. I'm going to try and get through a lot of this, and what I don't cover, I'll cover tomorrow in the day after tomorrow in lecture. Introduction to these muscles. So axial muscles, just like skeletal, there's appendicular muscles and axial muscles. So axial muscles have both their attachments on parts of the axial skeleton. So they used to be called origin and insertion. So in a lot of the questions and in your book, they still use this terminology. But currently in the field, you can use superior and inferior attachments or proximal and distal. The only problem with using superior and inferior or proximal and distal is you have to say what it's distal to. It's just easy to talk about it in origin and insertion. So for your exams, for essay questions, I am going to use origin and insertion. The functions of axial muscles include support the head and spinal column, used in facial expression, chewing and swallowing, aid in breathing, and support and protect the pelvic organs. So the axial muscles are organized into 5 groups: muscles of the head and neck, vertebral column, respiration, abdominal, and pelvic floor. So here are the muscles of the axial. I guess these are just selected muscles. These are random muscles I selected. I'm not sure why they did that. But here's the occipitofrontalis muscle, right? This makes sense because this is occipital eye, and then part of the frontal lobe. Orbicularis, right? Oculi, because it's around the eye orbit. Zygomaticus, right? Because the zygomatic arch is in this area. The orbicular oris, so that's the mouth, muscles around the mouth. The platysma, which is right here. Sternohyoid. This one you should know, the sternocleidomastoid. The masseter, right here, and the temporalis, right, on the temporal lobe. So I'm just going to go over the bolded muscles here. So here you have your external oblique. So it's also lateral. Here you have your external intercostal.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. So here is the external intercostal, right here, external or lateral. Internal intercostal, it's right in here. Right? These are the ribs. We talked about the costal ribs. Here's the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis. And remember it because it looks like they're going horizontal. Internal oblique and external oblique. And, okay, that's all for that slide. So here's a posterior view. So know these bolded ones right now. Occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis, sternocleidomastoid. So that's that strong right in the back. Like this muscle is that strong where you get neck pain and stuff. So this is the muscle right there in between that and your jaw. The semispinalis capitis, right? So the splenius capitis. The splenius cervicus, right, because this is where your cervical bone starts. And the levitator scapulae as well. We'll go over that in a moment again. And then the serratus, posterior, inferior. So right here, these three, right? The external oblique, internal oblique, and the erector spinae. So muscles of the head and neck, they're separated into several groups. Location, general functions, and most attached to the hyoid bone. Remember, that's the throat. So muscles of facial expression, they attach to superficial fascia or to skull bones. Since fascia is connected to the skin, contraction moves skin and changes its expression. And most are innervated by cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve. We'll get into those in the next chapter. So here's the muscles of facial expression. So this is superficial and deep. So we're just going to talk about from the outside going in layers. So the epicranius is the epicranial aponeurosis, the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis, the procerus, the corrugata supercilii, levator palpebrae superioris. Okay, so these are the ones that are important. The nasalis, right here, so the levator anguli oris, right, so it's still underneath the eye, close to the eye. The macinator, right here, so the masseter, not macinator, I'm sorry. The masseter is what moves your jaw up and down, that muscle. The buccinator is involved in chewing. Orbicularis oris is right here. Remember, both of these are orbicularis, but there's orbicularis oris and then orbicularis oculi. And then the mentalis is right here. The piastums, depressor labii inferioris, depressor anguli oris, the rhizorius, zygomatic major, right? So remember, zygomatic arch from the bones, this muscle is going to be right there, and the zygomatic minor, and the levator labial of the superioris. And here it is in a real human skull. They're kind of harder to see here, but I will still use this picture for easier ones, identification ones. So the muscles of facial expression continued. So some of these are going to be repeated. So the epicranial aponeurosis, frontal belly of occipitofrontalis. Right, so this view is a lot better. This is a lateral view. So the occipital belly of occipitofrontalis, the temporalis, right, in the temporal area, orbicularis oculi, the zygomaticus minor and major, and then in between is the levator anguli oris, then orbicular oris, mentals, depressor, and platysma. So here is a beautiful table that you can use to study from. So scalp and nose. So it's easier to put these into those groups, like what are the muscles of the scalp? What are the muscles of the nose? And then go through those instead of trying to learn it all at once. And then here's more. 6, there's more. So the actions, you should know all the actions too. I'm not going to expect you to know the tissue attachments or bony attachments, but you should know the origin and insertion, right? And innervation, no, because we haven't done the nervous system yet. It's page 7. Okay, so I'm going to end this video and start the next one from here.